As advertised, Björn and I are representing the EdTech Hub and telling you a little bit about the work that we're doing today. And just to say a thank you to the colleagues in the Hub whose work we're drawing on. So Björn will start off and then I'll join in. Oops.
All right, thank you so much, Sara, and hello everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here and be spending some time and answering some questions and giving you a little bit of an overview of the work of the Hub as well. So on this first slide, you can see stuff that Sue's really already alluded to. This is a classic illustration of the digital divide. You see the countries that have better connectivity and the countries that have poorer connectivity. However, that digital divide really isn't along national borders. Even within higher income countries, we know that the digital divide persists along socioeconomic lines, even in the UK, even in the Netherlands and other places of Europe. Next slide. So here's a really stark illustration of this. You're seeing Human Development Index. So this is now not a measure of bandwidth, but a measure of human development. And what you see here is if you know your West Africa, you can make out, Ghana and Nigeria and all of those countries in West Africa. And what we have is the Human Development Index, not as it's normally drawn by country, but by region. And you can see the more yellow, orangey regions that have higher Human Development Index and the darker, redder regions that have lower Human Development Index. And you can see how this changes as you go from the coast, where there's a lot of trade, into the more northern regions in Ghana and in Nigeria and those other countries. You can also see how you can see some little isolated sort of yellow and orangey spots. If you roughly know where Mali is, you can spot Bamako and Burkina Faso just north of Ghana. You can see like the region around Ouagadougou having a higher development index. So it's also a subnational issue of differences in terms of connectivity in both low income and high income country. Next slide. So now, next slide. Yeah, thank you. So now the question is, we got the digital divide, we have the socioeconomic differences. What does that mean for schooling, right? And so here you can see some of these, the differences in the school closures during the peak of COVID, and we know that between June, July 2020, 1.5 billion children were out of school, and a third of those were estimated to have no access to education provision at all. And again, that's regionally dependent. Worldwide, it was about a third, but in sub-Saharan Africa, it was about half. And what I like to say, and you remember the previous slide, is when you're in Nairobi and you're saying, okay, 50% of the children have access, is it every other child that you bump into, in one of the nice shopping malls that you have in Nairobi? No, of course not. All of those children have access, but the children in the deep rural areas, none of those have access. And that's how the 50% is composed. Yeah, next slide, please. So here, this is also very interesting, right? We can't assume that even lower tech is ubiquitous in low income countries. The response, the availability of tech within country and what tech you have access to, never mind, as we heard from Sue, using that technology and then using it for learning varies very hugely. So in less than 25% of low-income countries provide any type of remote learning, and most of these are using TV and radio, right? So in the low-income countries, we're really relying on TV and radio. And so by contrast, the high-income countries, see that big green bar that is online provision. Many of the high-income countries rely on online provision. But you might recall that even in the UK, there was a campaign where the BBC actually put some of their online content back onto terrestrial television because there were children that couldn't access it, okay? And so just finally, before I hand over to Sara, there are big in-country differences. And we think, okay, let's go to the lowest possible rate. Come on, radio, surely people have a radio, right? Now, overall in Kenya, 71% of households own a radio. There's only 28% in Ethiopia and 24% in Tanzania. But now, look at the urban-rural divide. So for example, in Mauritius, in urban areas, 3/4 have televisions. 3/4 of households have televisions. It's interesting, it's not all of them, right? It's only 3/4. But compare that to the rural area, it's only 7% of television ownership in rural areas. And similar statistics also apply to radios, right? So Turkana country, one of the poor and arid areas in Kenya, only 1 in 10 households own a radio. And that radio might not even be available to the child because it's used in other ways. And even if the child's using it and is accessing, educational radio programming, is that child actually learning? So you see there's a multitude of questions here. Next slide. I'm just going to very quickly go through the barriers to digital equity. You can just quickly glance down this. There's the rural versus urban divide, as I've explained, inequitable access in homes. There's language barriers. Most of the content is in English. The question is the content actually the right kind of content to appeal to children, to be intelligible to children? And then digital literacy depends on ordinary literacy. So we have a double barrier for children that don't have ordinary literacy and then can't develop digital literacy accordingly. Finally, policies can be barriers too, like discouragement of mobile phone use in some tertiary colleges, but also sometimes discouragement for open resources through certain types of policies. Right, so now, having painted this rather glum picture, I'm going to hand over to Sara to talk about some of the approaches that we're pursuing in the EdTech Hub.
Thanks, Björn. Okay, so what is the Hub doing? It's a research program, and we're trying to improve the evidence base, basically. And just to make the point that we're actually broadening the focus from perhaps what this session was focused on in terms of addressing the digital divide, to moving towards how can EdTech actually be used to address equity issues that are related to learning outcomes. So we're looking at sort of two sides of the coin there. The program is quite a large scale program going over 8 years. We're 2 years in, and we're concerned with scalable, sustainable, and contextualized and appropriate forms of EdTech use. So some of the marginalized learners that we focus on are those who are marginalized by poverty, and Björn's alluded to some of those statistics, by gender, by language, by disabilities and special needs, by being refugees or displaced learners, by being out of school. And again, he's talked about the huge numbers that covers, and those who are in remote rural areas that are quite hard to reach with EdTech. I mean, there are some encouraging findings. When girls, for example, have access to tech, it can be actually more empowering for them than for boys, and the benefits are quite widespread. But we all know that girls often have much less access to technology, so they don't often get that chance owing to various cultural biases and so on. A recent review that was carried out by some of our colleagues into the use of EdTech for supporting children with disabilities indicates great potential for mobile apps for deaf learners and for those with visual impairment, for example. But they also identify that, we need to consider the needs of the learners, get the right fit with the tech, get the right provision for them, and parents and teachers and carers all need to sort of be in that mix. They need to be consulted, but they also need to be developed and upskilled. And then funding has to be targeted in order for this to make progress. And in particular, governments need to join in. A clear conclusion from lots of the work that we're doing is that one size doesn't fit all. Learners' needs are different, contextual needs are different, and also the infrastructural constraints vary enormously. So we need a multimodal approach, and we need to combine high tech, low tech, and actually no tech if we want to reach all the marginalized learners. Low tech options can be quite apt in low income countries, as you can imagine, especially where lots of learners are out of school. And a couple of examples have been the Rising on Air radio initiative during the pandemic, combined with text messaging, reached 10 million children. Another study carried out with large data by one of my PhD students, Joe Watson, showed that the educational TV cartoon in Tanzania improves maths learning for lots and lots of children, and it's highly cost effective compared to other educational interventions altogether. Another message is that, we don't need to reinvent the wheel, and that keeps the cost low if we don't keep creating brand new resources. It's often more effective, more cheaper to build on what's already there by aligning with existing curriculum, keeping hold of the underlying pedagogies, and using the available hardware. One nice example is Calibri, which offers an open source ecosystem to support two important processes. So on the left, you can see Calibri Studio, which has a menu for the user to choose open educational resources such as Parathon Books or Khan Academy to align with the particular curriculum. And then those particular resources are transferred over to the Calibri VLE. And that can be used in a school or in a community setting without any connectivity, so it can be used offline. So students can access the resources then and undertake quizzes, and the teachers can log in to manage the work. Teachers and parents are obviously mediating the technology use, and parents especially during the pandemic. So it's important to develop them, but we find that the teacher professional development that they're offered is often lacking or inadequate. We're conducting a systematic literature review at the moment on tech-mediated TPD in low-income countries, and finding that there's quite a lot of work to do. Oops, sorry. One example of how we can support teachers is the OER for Schools program that Björn and I have developed and trialed in Zambia over some years. And this is, again, stressing the importance of being locally contextualized and teachers being able to adapt to their own contexts. And then I'll just finish. I still haven't heard the bell, Rupert. Oh, there it goes. Okay, right on time. Just to say, these are our 5, well, TPD is one of our main focus areas, and these are the others that we are concentrating our work on in the hub over the next couple of years. And we've identified these as being high potential evidence gaps. So there's some evidence that these are promising uses of tech for equity, but we still need to know more. So that's where the research will come. So thank you very much for your attention, and I will finish there.